Hey, Josh here. Just a heads up. After this episode, I'm taking a break to record more interviews and make more music. I'll be back on May 2nd, 2024. In the meantime, I'll still be posting bonus stories at my Patreon, so head over there to get your road story fix. Make sure to follow and subscribe wherever you listen, and if you're liking the show, tell a friend. Thanks for your support, and on to the show.
And suddenly all these guards and other people get on, and they're basically carrying bags and bags, sports bags filled with cocaine that's just going under every single seat and, in every single locker on this train. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh my God.
Hello, my Atypical Daydreamers. Welcome to the show. My guest today is Lucy Griffiths. Now, I've met some real badasses in my time, but she might be one of the most. This former TV journalist mixes machine guns and pink like nobody else.
In 2001, I left the UK and decided that I was going to travel around the world without using a plane. And I traveled for 2 years and went by train, by bus, by boat, by ship, by yacht and donkey and walking and God knows what else. And along the way had lots of adventures. So I left the UK by train and traveled across Europe and then ended up in Warsaw. And I think it was about December 29th or something. So it was really snowy, really cold. And I ended up in this youth hostel where I met this very drunk British guy who was like insanely drunk and chatting to everyone. He was really social and I'm quite shy. And he had met these Russians who were diamond smugglers. And we all decided that we were going to cross to Belarus and then go on to Moscow. And we all went together. Oh, this guy was called Robbie. I've just suddenly remembered his name. And so we ended up being on this train. And Robbie was so drunk that he was basically being obnoxious with the guards. So we ended up being kicked off the train in Belarus. And we were left at this really small, remote train station. And it's about -12. And so really, really cold. And Robbie's then taken off by the guards and probably beaten up and put in jail or whatever. So then there's me and the Diamond Smugglers. And we go on this slow train, this kind of really basic train, I think back to the border with Poland. So I'm sitting on this train and suddenly all these guards and other people get on and they're basically carrying big black holdalls. And the holdalls are stuffed full of cocaine. And they are like, it's like bags and bags, sports bags filled with cocaine that's just going under every single seat and, in every single locker on this train. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh my God. I am like party to this and I'm like sitting there and I remember texting my friend, like keeping my head down, texting my friends going, oh my God, what do I do? And I didn't know whether to leave because I didn't know where I was or stay on the train. I stayed on the train. I got to the border. I got off the train, still petrified that I was going to somehow be done for drug smuggling, even though I was nothing to do with it. And then managed to get a fast train, met up again with the Russian diamond smugglers, and they took me to Moscow. And so ended up going around Moscow with them and them taking me to some rather crazy, dubious nightclubs filled with Russian prostitutes. And it was a rather insane way to start my trip. I spent some time in Cambodia, which I completely fell in love with. The people were so warm and hospitable, and they'd been through so much. And at the time, there was still lots of reconciliation going on between the Khmer Rouge, and the government, and all the roads were pretty impassable at the time. There were no sort of tarmac roads. They were all mud. So in jungle roads, in winter, in the rainy season, they would get very, very muddy, and the potholes were just as big as ponds. I mean, they were just huge. And I found this great translator. She was about 20, and I'd take her out on these adventures, and we'd have a driver, and we'd go and do various stories. And she'd always bring from the market a big bag of, in the same way that we eat what I call crisps, you call chips, fried potato, she would bring a big bag of fried spiders. And she would munch on fried spiders. And they were these black, big fried spiders that she would basically eat like eating a bag of crisps. And I remember we were going on this journey it was kind of to the Thai border, to where one of the last remaining Khmer Rouge leaders called Hun Sen lived. And I was going to interview him, see if I could interview him. And so she had her big bag of fried spiders. Of course, the road was so bad that she ended up throwing up all over the car with the fried spiders. So it was, that was joyful. But we made it, and Hun Sen was sitting on his porch, and he didn't really want to talk to me. But I think because I was quite young and a woman, I could get away with things that lots of other people couldn't get away with, because I could just be really girly, and somehow they think that I was not a threat. So they'd talk to me. And so I interviewed Hun Sen, had lots more adventures in Cambodia. I got really obsessed with human rights in the country. There was a lot of trafficking of women. So women from Vietnam or women from Laos who were trafficked to Cambodia to be sex workers. It wasn't something that we really talked about in the West at the time. It was kind of beginnings of it being talked about. I would go and work on the Thai border a lot. So I worked in the refugee camps on the Thai-Burmese border and became quite obsessed with Burma. So I'd go in with the Free Burma Rangers, who were this kind of group they were sort of American, probably former Marines, missionaries, stroke mercenaries. They weren't mercenaries, like they weren't being paid for it, but it was kind of that sort of vibe. And they would go in and work with different groups within Burma who were fighting the junta. And so there's about 134 different ethnic groups within Burma, and some of which are Muslim, like the Rohingya, and some of which are Christian, like the Karen. And there's lots and lots of different religions and ethnicities. And so the Free Burma Rangers would go in and work with particularly the Karen because they were Christian. So the army, the Burmese army, would go and fight the villagers and basically burn down the villages. They'd rape the women. They would torture the women. They'd use them as sex slaves. They would put snakes up their vaginas. I mean, it was really, really horrendous. And they'd use the men as porters to carry the weaponry. So I'd go in and report on them going, and they would go into certain villages and train the Karen and do kind of different activities to try and reclaim land. And I would do a lot of work with the women who were living in the refugee camps who, had been brutally tortured. It was awful. And so that sort of really shaped my view of journalism and changed the way that I went from being like whatever kind of, sort of local news, national news, to doing much more international news and being like slightly obsessed about those kind of stories.
Hey, Josh here. I love making this podcast, and I'd love to make it my full-time gig. Besides telling the stories, I'm basically a one-man band, and that takes time. If you're enjoying the podcast, please consider becoming a patron. You'll have access to loads of great bonus stories, and you'll have the satisfaction of knowing that you're supporting a truly independent podcast. Find the Patreon link in the show notes. And thanks.
So one of the times I was in Pakistan covering an earthquake. So we'd go and, when it was a big earthquake, I think it was kind of Swat Valley and, thousands of people displaced. I think it was 2006 or 7. I can't remember, around that time. So I was there covering that story. And then afterwards, I'd go and stay with my friend Susanna, who lived in Islamabad. So she was a journalist and we'd go and do other stories around Pakistan. And I wanted to go, so I was going to Kabul in Afghanistan, and I wanted to go to, there was a village near the border with Afghanistan where it was a gun village. And so they made AK-47s. So each person in the town was intimately involved in making guns. So the kids would be sweeping up the droppings. The 5-year-olds would be making scraping out the casings in the guns and doing the bullets. And, and older kids would be doing other things or like banging the metal or, so it was a whole kind of factory. It was Dickensian kind of factory of gun making. I wandered around to do this story and there's me in my pink, because I love pink, shalwar kameez. So I'm so it's not obvious, she says sarcastically, that I was a Westerner and I'm in pink and everyone else is kind of in drab colours. And anyway, so we ended up being picked up by the Taliban after not long. Susanna and I, there we are, we have to go off to this big kind of country estate of these Taliban leaders. And they all spoke perfect English. And they all educated their children at the best British schools like Eton and Harrow. They all educated at Oxford or Cambridge. And so it was this complete dichotomy of they're the Taliban, but they've been educated in the British system. And basically they had been, until the Soviets withdrew from Afghanistan, they were fighting alongside the British, alongside the Americans. They were funded by the CIA. So suddenly their funding gets cut off, 9/11 hits, and then they're suddenly the enemy. And so they then had to find other sources of money. It was just a money game. They then want to show us their guns. And I'm like, well, I've never shot a gun in my life. And I'm really not really into guns. So I'm like, oh, I don't really do guns. And I could do the girly thing because I'm in pink and I could so Susanna said, oh, I've shot guns before, I'll do it. So anyway, so Susanna shoots this gun, but she starts screaming. And she's completely freaked out by doing this. And of course, this isn't a cool thing to do with the Taliban, to be kind of freaking out. And so anyway, so I'm like, oh, God. So I said, I'll do it. Okay, so I have a go with this gun. And of course, I'm being really girly. So of course, they have to show me what to do and everything. So, and then actually it was quite fun. So I'm firing this shotgun, this AK-47, whatever it's called, at these apple orchards. And I'm like, doing thing. And I'm like, oh, this is fun. This is quite good. So anyway, we have tea. And I think because we managed to kind of jolly the whole thing along, we leave. And that was it. And it was like, and we still to this day laugh about the fact that we managed to kind of get out of what could have been a really tricky situation. I mean, we could have been kidnapped, but we managed to kind of make it into like, oh, just going around for a cup of tea. I then went down through Malaysia to Singapore and I crewed on yachts. So I got a yacht from Singapore to Bali. So this was with an American guy, and he was sailing around the world with his girlfriend, and she'd dumped him and that he needed crew. So me and this other couple got on, and he was this rich lawyer who, when somebody burnt themselves with coffee, in a drive-through in McDonald's. He sued McDonald's, and he was like the litigation lawyer, and she made, I can't remember, it was like record numbers at the time. This is 20 years ago, at least 30 years ago, probably now. Anyway, so he had this schooner, and but he was really laid back, and we basically sailed to Bali, and we'd stop at these amazing islands along the way and snorkel and dive. And so it took us a month or so, and it was just like a big holiday, but we still had to, do the early shift or the late shift crewing on this yacht and make dinners. Anyway, so then I got to Bali, had a great time in Bali. And then I got on this other boat that was going to Brisbane. So this was a delivery crew. So I was part of the delivery crew. So the yacht had been owned by somebody who was making a TV show. And so this is early days of reality TV. There was this guy called Jesse Martin who had sailed around the world and was the youngest person to sail around the world. So he was a bit of a star in Australia. And I think he was 16 when he sailed around the world. So he and his brother were on this yacht with some crew members, and then they made a reality show. And then I think there was all kinds of chaos with the boat, and also lots of like love drama triangles with the girls. And so the thing imploded, and somebody had to deliver the boat back to Australia to sell the boat. So there was this Australian skipper who had never left Australia before. So he's very, very kind of quite insular, narrow-minded in his sort of perception of what it's like in Indonesia. So he was quite racist, to say the least, and it had no experience at all. And then there was me, a German guy, and a guy who was cycling around the world. So he brought his bike. So we're all on this boat, and basically the boat starts leaking water. And we've disembarked from Indonesia in Bali, but there's loads of islands that you sail past in Indonesia to get to the next country. So the next country is Papua New Guinea, which at the time was in the middle of a war. So we're sailing along, and this particular night, the sea is deathly calm. And there's a film called Dead Calm. And if you watch that film, it was a very similar experience. So basically, the sea is so calm, there's no waves. It's like a mill pond. There's no wind. And we're just bobbing along, and we're running out of water. And we basically have 2 liters of water each to last us. And that's it. Everything else is gone. It's burning hot. And we're letting off distress calls, but we're in Indonesian waters, and all the Indonesian fishermen don't understand us, don't respond. They don't understand like the international maritime obligations, all of that. So we are, we've been there and the sun's coming up, and we've, so about since 4 a.m, we're thinking, oh my God, this is serious. And then by this, 12 o'clock midday, we're beginning to think, oh my goodness. Eventually, I think about in the afternoon, 2-ish, an Australian sheep ship is passing. So this is like a big ferry full of like cargo ship full of sheep. So these are live sheep that are being transported to Saudi Arabia. So that comes and rescues us and tows us to East Timor. And so we go to East Timor. There's a war going on. But it's the first country that we can go to disembark. So we get the boat fixed and we literally were staying with all the UN members in the hotel, in the main hotel in Dili. And we're there about a week. And then we sail on to Australia. And we arrive into Australia. So Australia at the time was really struggling with boat people. So people were sailing from Indonesia and other places. So illegal immigrants were sailing there and landing on various islands around Australia and then like claiming asylum. And so they had this massive issue with what they call boat people. So the immigration minister excised all the islands. So it meant that now if you sailed into Australia, you couldn't disembark in Australia on an island. You had to go to like one of the main ports to kind of check in. So we arrived into Thursday Island. So an island in Australia. So I was the first illegal boat person to arrive into Australia. And so it was very convenient for the Australians because it was like, we are not racist. This is just policy. It doesn't matter where you're from in the world. This is the policy. So they put me in a detention centre for about 48 hours on Thursday Island. Then eventually they agreed to let me sail down the coast of Australia and then fly out from Brisbane. So, but I had the skipper was this slightly crazy nut job, to say the least. You know, by this point, he was so stressed by the entire journey, he was on the whiskey. So he was basically drunk the whole time. The three of us didn't really have a clue because we were not, captains at all of any expertise, any sailing expertise. We'd certainly learned, but we weren't great. And anyway, so Edwin had a massive row with him and got off on the top of, so it's called Cape York, so the very tip of Australia. If you look at the map, the kind of right-hand point at the top. So this is impassable roads. It's filled with crocodiles. It's like swampy. But he got off. He literally off he got to the most remote part and cycled down the whole, so it's pretty rare. And if anything had happened to Edwin, Michael, the skipper, would have been done for manslaughter because it was pretty serious. I remember, and we'd run out of food by this point. So there were these big shrimp trawlers and they had loads of food and stuff like that. And they were making fortunes on. And I remember them giving us some shrimps. It was me, of course, the girl, like being sent over with a rowing boat to go and like beg for shrimps. And I remember them saying to me, like, he's a weirdo. You don't have to stay on that boat if you don't want to. He's scared. And I said, I know he's completely weird, but I can't get off the boat because of like the immigration purposes. So instead I stayed on the boat, went to Brisbane, and managed to get on another boat where I then sailed on to New Zealand and then on to across the Pacific, like Vanuatu and other Pacific islands, and then ending up in like then South America and then Caribbean and then down the Atlantic and then sailing back to the UK.
I want to thank Lucy for sharing her experience. Be sure to check out her book, Make Money While You Sleep, or one of her many small business and solopreneur courses available online. This podcast was created and produced by me, Josh Caldwell. Music by Visual Aid, my side music project. General support and copywriting by Miranda Caldwell. If you like the show, please follow, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to financially support the show, check out my Patreon page. You'll have access to loads of great bonus stories. You can find the link in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come back next week.